What have been some of the most successful traits of founders who have succeeded?
Where do they get the conviction from, or the idea or the observation that they should build a company? If you're a pessimist, it's very hard to see that you should keep doing this.
We have this term that in India we use called audacity, and someone who's able to dream of the future. How do you actually see that in a person?
We don't know what's going to work. What we do know is that if an incredible founder who's very ambitious and who has huge conviction is working on this problem, we should probably back them.
What are the kind of founders that have not worked for you?
People who believe they should be a founder, but they don't have the actual deep conviction. And that is not the right way to start a company.
What's the top one company in the portfolio that you're sort of looking at?
So the one that I've observed kind of the closest over a long time is a company called
Vegard, great to have you in Bangalore. Would love to know more about you for the audience in India.
So I'm co-founder and chief operating officer at Antler. Background, I'm born and raised in Norway. Had a short stint in Norwegian military, went to engineering uni, worked at McKinsey, and then joined my previous colleague from McKinsey, Magnus, in building Antler back in 2018.
I think it's great for Indian founders to understand you and Antler has now been global. We've been in existence for 7 years now across the world. India has been 4.5 years of the last 7.5 years. But what have been some of the most successful traits of founders who have succeeded across Singapore, across Nordics, across just globally what we have seen?
I think you can probably split. There's like a couple of things that have to do with like the just the person, and there's a couple of things that have to do with like where do they get the conviction from, or the idea or the observation that they should build something, that they should build a company.
Mm-hmm.
So if you start with the kind of almost like the providence of the idea, I think a lot of the top companies that both we've invested into and kind of globally have come from, let's say, someone often working in another kind of cutting-edge startup, working on the problem that they needed to solve for that company. Maybe that company was the first company that really had to solve that at scale, and then they, maybe spend years working on it. It's really hard, and then they realize, like, hey, there's going to be another 1,000 companies coming after us facing the same challenges. Let me jump out of my company and start this and build this as a software. We've seen that from the very first company we invested into, a company called Staffing, based in Indonesia, was basically that. So he was an early employee at Gojek. Gojek was the fastest growing company in Southeast Asia. He was working on basically corralling sometimes hundreds of thousands of people kind of across all Indonesia, Southeast Asia, in big groups. And he thought, like, hey, this is really hard, but I can actually build a company to do this for other companies. And now whenever I meet a founder or startup from Indonesia, most of them are customers of Staffing.
And I think in India, we use this, the closest proxy is just what we call either customer obsession and people just being sort of really strongly entrenched with the customer problem statement, because it just gives you a lot higher probability for staying the course.
Yeah.
If you spend so many years, especially in business like healthcare. One of our most successful companies, for example, in real estate is House Easy. And the founders at House Easy were selling homes for almost a decade before they decided to actually come out of one of the largest real estate companies in India and then start off House Easy. And now they've raised a Series B with Axel. So that's certainly absolutely one trait. What else have you seen across the world?
I think the other part is you kind of need the combination of, one is like a personal conviction that this company needs to exist, combined with kind of very high grit, almost like the ability to take, like being a founder is kind of getting punched in the face, this every single day for years on end, and then, perhaps it works out. So
Right.
kind of, you need both to be very convinced that this company should exist.
Uh-huh.
And second, you need to be able to take that, those challenges and that pain every single day whilst you're building that company.
Right.
So kind of grit and conviction are probably two things. And I think a view on the future that is optimistic, kind of paired a bit with grit and conviction, where if you're a pessimist, it's very hard to see that you should keep doing this.
Right.
Because like no company is successful from day one. Very few companies are successful in year one. So you kind of need to believe that like, hey, this is going to be great. At some point, we're going to make this and it's going to be great. So the optimism, I think, is a huge part of it.
I think pessimists become great analysts. Optimists become the great founders or operators. I think what you said about grit especially, I think is a phenomenal point because it's a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year journey, and even at the end of it, you just don't know whether it's going to succeed. And we have an example. We do look at grit very intensely. We have an example of a company called Apni Bus.
Yeah.
Sumit is the founder, and Sumit used to be selling utility tickets as a bus sort of conductor for almost 2-3 years, and ran his own buses. Obviously, it became very difficult to run a very physical infrastructure business, so he sort of built a platform to actually take this to hundreds and thousands of buses. But Sumit is a great embodiment of someone who's like been so gritty that he's actually gone through so many ups and downs and said, okay, in the next 10 years, I'm going to still go back to build the same business but build a very different arc of it. So I'm sure that's one thing that, we would look for. How would you look for future looking? You said conviction and you said future looking. We have this term that in India we use called audacity, and someone who's able to dream of the future. How do you actually see that in a person?
I think one part is just general optimism.
Mm.
Like I think you can't get away you can't take that journey without being an optimist. And I think you can see from how someone speaks about kind of an idea or something that they're convinced about their kind of level of optimism.
Mm.
So that part is quite it's quite possible to spot.
Right.
And now what is really hard to spot is like, so they have this vision of the future. Is that the right vision?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, like, will that kind of company, whether it's their company or another company, like will that company actually exist?
Right.
Or will the future look completely different?
Right.
I found that it's really hard to spot. So what this kind of our simplification of that is like, we don't know what's going to work. What we do know is that if an incredible founder who's very ambitious and who has huge conviction is working on this problem, like we should probably back them.
I think that's a great proxy to use because we see a lot of deep tech companies. We have a company called Inspexity, and the founder, Professor Arun, he actually wants to service satellites in space.
Yeah.
And you would think like, wow, that's quite futuristic. Now, whether you believe in that vision or not, you would believe in his ability to be sort of have high conviction on that vision. And if things go right, then you would want to paint the vision of the world where that going right actually has a very strong, just importance for India and overall the world. Similarly, we have a much younger founder, and that's one question I want to ask you, but who wants to build, automatic, smaller aircrafts, right? Unmanned, smaller aircraft, specifically for cargo. We have someone else who's sort of, given the whole geopolitical tension, wants to build anti-drone systems for India.
Yeah.
Now, if you've seen each of these, obviously these are a bit more futuristic. There's a play of AI, there's a play of deep tech. And in each of this, you see that the founder has a particular vision to the world. And when they paint it, you would want to follow it, right? And that's what magical founders can do. Have you seen younger founders, older founders? What's the latest trend across the world? Because I can talk to you about India and what we are seeing after that.
So we've invested into, I think the youngest one we invested into was probably here in India at 16 years old. We invested into people who are 60 plus.
Oh, wow. That's not yet happened.
I think you can succeed at almost any age as a founder. I think the types of companies, like someone like us, we're not going to build the next social media company. If we start something today, we could probably do something well in a variety of sectors. We're not gonna catch the youth in figuring out what's the next trend in the next 5 years.
Right.
So B2C companies, especially kind of novel things like the TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook back in the day, they're typically built by young people who build for their audience and maybe see the future 5 years ahead for what their audience might like. Mid-career, you have a lot more kind of B2B where let's say, you're the Optimus founder who's kind of been in that industry, seen the kind of tricky problems that are very specific for that niche or that industry and understand them well enough to build a company that solves them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess later on, there are some companies where you actually need like a massive amount of like expertise, like a biotech company.
Yeah.
Few people at say even mid-20s will have the expertise to build a company that creates a new molecule that solves
Right.
some cancer or something.
Right. I think that's a very fair way to look at it. I think in India, what's changing, and it could have been sort of similar till around 2 years back. I think youngsters were either moving towards very young social networks, or Web3 became a big thing for youngsters to sort of very quickly jump in. They were also creating a bunch of B2C products for youngsters. But in the last 1-2 years, what we have seen is that our youngsters were going after deep tech problems. Like this very young girl who's a college dropout. She's actually building, her name is Kushi. She's actually building a completely unmanned vehicle, as I said, right? There is someone who's, 16-year-old who's actually building the next foundational AI model, which should be better, than some of the other models on certain aspects, on cost and on speed and on reasoning. This is a kid in 10th standard, right? And so we're seeing this new age of people who are just coming out. A lot of the AI founders, for example, we see much younger, even though, they're building in SaaS, they're building in healthcare, but these are people who probably are challenging status quo. So there's this new age and wave of younger founders for sure, building far beyond what you would think are their comfort areas.
Yeah.
One other question on the other side: what are the kind of founders that have not worked for you, or are the any specific characteristics, or when would you say that this is a trend that maybe it's not the right fit for Antler at this point in time?
Yeah. What we've seen a lot is people who believe there should be a founder, but they don't have the actual deep conviction. It might be more like they see, let's say, people in a network or the startup company. It's like, hey, it seems like people like me, the most ambitious people that I know, they're starting companies. So I probably should as well. And that is not the right way to start a company, because back to the point on grit, like when times get tough, which it always will, these are the people who also won't have the conviction to stay the course. And maybe it's kind of a bit too opportunistic. They're choosing to work on something that kind of seems kind of easy. And the risk with easy problems is that they're often harder than hard problems. Like easy problems, you'll have another 1,000 companies working on the same problem. A hard problem, like the satellite company,
Right.
there's very few who's going to be audacious enough to go after that problem. And then, yes, it's technically hard, but in some ways it might be easier as well. So the types of people that we've seen who kind of come out and start a company with lower, how do you call it, personal conviction is, let's say, they've been 10 years in banking. Maybe had like a great investment bank, like a Goldman, or they've been in McKinsey, or they've been at some other place, and they kind of see people around them starting companies, and they feel like, hey, I probably should. We've developed a bit of a better radar for that, because it's a bit of an archetype.
I think ex-McKinsey folks have started successful VC companies, but maybe not startups. But though I'm sure there are exceptions to the rule. But the one trend that we see is what you say, which is too early. They don't have enough conviction, and they just jump in because, of course, everyone around them is starting. And we saw this a lot in 2022, where there were just a lot of people. I think it's reduced over the last 2-3 years. But that's something that if you don't have full conviction, you don't stay the course. And it's a cool thing. You maybe raise your first round, but you sort of give up very quickly, or you just don't have the grit to sort of pivot. But when you hit the market, things just change. Probably 1/3 of the ideas have at least some level of a soft pivot. 1/3 of the ideas have probably a hard pivot. So almost half to 2/3 of the ideas, any which way change, which essentially means that unless you have some level of grit and some level of very strong conviction to stay the course with that grit, you're sort of going to give up, right? And we have seen that in the past. And of course, we've also invested in a few in the past, but I think that's one big learning even for us. So last question to sort of close things out. What's the top one company in the portfolio that, globally that you're sort of looking at? Is it lovable? Is it, which is the one that's going to really take off in your eyes?
So the one that I've observed kind of the closest over a long time is a company called Eralo, which is a eSIMs marketplace. And it's an interesting story because the founder and CEO, Bahadir, he started his career, so he's had 5 companies where he sold SIM cards. So he sold SIM cards in the early 2000s. He's been standing on the docks of Singapore with, one of these plates where you have a plate on your front and a plate on your back. And then when ships came to the port of Singapore was a very busy port, he would sell them SIM cards. So he's had SIM cards for sailors, SIM cards for, airports. And then he started Eralo, which is basically the first eSIMs marketplace where you can get a SIM card for every country, and that was the one that succeeded. But he's been at it for basically 10 years before he started Arlo. It's been his whole career in this. So he had the conviction. He's clearly shown the grit to stay the course, even though like all the other attempts were not really that successful. And he was, I guess, among the first 20 companies we backed back in 2019.
And Arlo is also most famously the first unicorn for Antler. So obviously a lot of us, Arlo, Bahadir was kind enough. He actually addressed our second cohort. We actually had him for a founder speak online, and some of the stories that he has told us during that session were quite crazy. Right? Yeah. And I think it's a great case of pretty much a lot of the things that we've talked about, right? So sort of wind up the conversation. Massive grit, resilience, crazy customer obsession to make sure that the product was great. He's been in that industry for a long time, really went about building it, and probably one of the first success stories for Antler. Great to have you. I think it's great to hear the Antler global side of things as we talk through India examples, and enjoy your time in India.
Thank you.